All right, let's do Unit 7's Real Estate Leases Snapshot Review. Here we go. Number 1, we were talking about leases, and we looked at it, the lease contract, the instrument of leasehold conveyance, and the contract of covenants and obligations. So it kind of makes up 2 parts. The landlord grants temporary exclusive use and trade for rent and reversion. That's a very important phrase that I would say. So those 2 bullet points are very important to memorize. The landlord rights and obligations. So the leasehold rights and obligations, the tenant has exclusive use and possession, quiet enjoyment, ability to profit from the property. Tenant obligations, they got to pay rent and maintain the premises and follow the rules. Landlord's rights, receive rent, repossess, monitor property condition. Landlord's obligations, support and services and maintenance. Leasehold rights survive death and conveyance or encumbrances, unless it's a tenancy at will. Parties, legal descriptions, exclusive possession, legal use, legal terms, lease terms, consideration, offer, and acceptance signatures written if over 1 year in term. That's some of the requirements for a valid contract or a lease contract. Remember, if it's written over 1 year, it must be in writing, per the statute of frauds. Some of the lease clauses we looked at are rents, deposit clauses, term clauses, repair and maintenance clauses, subletting and assignment clauses, rules and regulations. Remember the difference between subletting and assignment. Improvements, alterations, options, what happens upon damage and destruction. Types of leases based on expense, responsibility, how rent is paid, property type, and the rights leased. The gross lease, you want to memorize these. Gross lease, landlord pays all expenses, tenant pays more rent. Net lease, tenant pays some or all expenses, rent is less. Sometimes we could call it a triple net lease. A percentage lease is the landlord receives rent minimum plus percentage of retailer's sales. Then we looked at the difference between a residential lease and a commercial lease. A residential lease, gross lease, hybrid, short-term, uniform terms, reflect landlord-tenant standards. And then the commercial lease, longer terms, entails tenant improvements, complex, and negotiable lease terms. That's the fundamental difference between sort of residential and commercial. In ground leasing, landlord owns and leases the ground but does not own improvements. A proprietary lease deals with cooperatives, cooperative unit owners, indefinite terms assigned to new unit owner or shareholder on the sale of the shares. Leasing of rights, leasehold transfer of rights for limited use, example, air, mineral, and water rights. Then we got into what is default and how it all works. Remedies for default, sue for damages, lease cancellation and or specific performance. That's forcing the other side to do what they said that they were going to do. That's specific performance. Default by the tenant, we could do cancellation, damages, a suit for possession, which is known as actual eviction, and we must give proper notice. Sometimes we call that notice a notice to quit. When the landlord defaults, it's called a suit for constructive eviction, and then we must vacate the premises to uphold this right when the condition still exists. Remember that item we highlighted in blue about the leaking roof. Causes for lease termination, well, there's default, there's term expiration, notice, voluntary agreement, property destruction, condemnation, death, and in some cases, abandonment. But simply abandoning the property doesn't absolve the tenant for the rent payments that are owed. Then we wrapped up by talking about the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, aims to balance landlord and tenant rights, to standardize leases and eviction procedures, and to protect tenants, serve as a model for state-level legislation. And the areas of regulation here, contract language, waivers of right, deposits, obligation of the landlord and the tenant, and default and the eviction process. So that's a summation of all of the elements inside of unit number 7, leases. And when we come back, let's get into some questions and check them out and see how you guys do. See you in a minute.